Sounds great.
Thanks. All right. Well, it is 9:30 here. It is time for the sessions to start. Welcome to the DULT working group. You can see the little QR code up there. Please make sure to scan that. It'll do a couple of things. One, it will allow you to use the on-site tool so you can get yourself in and out of the queue to participate in the communication. It will also ensure that we get the right sized room next time. I don't remember if, well, I mean, it's a little bigger. I mean, Australia, we really had the largest room, which we didn't need. And then the next time we had a slightly smaller room, which was still a little large, but we're right sizing it. So that's good. Um, what else? I'm going to start showing my slides that I made because they're so pretty. Share slides so you know where we are. That's DULT. I'm Sean.
Hi, America.
We just met actually. We've been doing virtually this whole time. It's been great. All right, so this is the note well. It's Wednesday, so hopefully you've seen this before. It's a reminder of the IETF policies and procedures. A lot of this has to do with IPR related stuff. So if you have something related to IPR and you know about it, you need to say it, whether it's yours or somebody else's. If you do not participate. That's pretty straightforward. There's some other things on anti-harassment and code of conduct and stuff, but we'll cover that next. So the next slide is the note really well, which is kind of the professional stuff, like keep it professional. If you have any questions about that, you can ask the chairs, you can ask an area director, you can ask the IETF chair, because I think he's here. I guess the real upshot here is you don't have to like somebody's idea, but you gotta at least act like you like them. No, that's really what we're hoping for, right? Some meeting tips again. We did the on-site tool. If you're going to get to the microphone, please make sure to use that so that we can get people in and out of the queue. And then the agenda. Some quick administrivia. We have 2 documents that we're going to talk about today. We have 3 that we've adopted just recently. There's a 4th one we're working on. And I guess we had an interim a week and a half ago. We'll do a 2-second recap of that. And then, so first one, we'll do the second document that's listed, the document 3, the protocol document, because Brent, I think, is still in California and it's late or early, depends how you look at it. And then document 1, Maggie's going to present, but she's a little closer. Any other agenda bashing, as they would say? Great. I guess the only thing we want to say is we had an interim, which we thought was, we have 3 documents. We had people volunteer and start writing things right away. That was really great. Oh, this reminds me while you're typing away. We do need a minute taker. You're willing to do it? All right, great. Erica's going to do it for us. You're all lucky. So we had 3 documents that we had adopted, and we had one that nobody had stepped forward to. And then at our last meeting, somebody raised their hand and was like, I think I have an idea, or I've written a paper that I think that will solve this problem. So we had an interim to see if it would work. And I think the basic outcome is that maybe it would, but I think we need to do a little more drilling down into the threat model and figuring out what actually our privacy requirements are. So we didn't convert that paper into an internet draft and do a working group last call yet. So we're still kind of noodling on that idea, but it is nice that we have at least have a candidate at some point where we can go, where before we had kind of a black hole. And that's really it. We did take minutes. It's all up on the data tracker. If you want to go review anything, you can find a link to the paper. It's also on the mailing list. Ecker?
Yeah. I just want to flag that there's actually still a need for said document, whether or not we adopt the technique described in the paper we're discussing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, but I yes, but I actually mean something different. What I mean is that the document that was being proposed was to say, given a certain set of facts about when you think someone is present with you, this is when you should alert to them actually stalking you or following you, right? And the paper we're talking about changes the set of facts, but does not necessarily change, but it doesn't necessarily change the need for an algorithm, which is the thing that actually needs to be provided, right? So I think like there's going to be like some thinking required, even if we do adopt that technology that is just not just taking the technology and shoving it in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not going to be an open shut moment. I think that's where people will have a lot of fun reviewing it. Cool. All right. So without further ado, Brent, do you want me to share the slides, or do you want to try to run them?
It would be great if you could show them, Sean.
Awesome. I will do that. You just say next, and I will do that.
Amazing. All right, so let's jump in. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're at. Thanks for joining today. We're going to talk about document number 3, or the accessory protocol. Next, please. So agenda that we pulled together, Siddharth and I worked on these slides together. The agenda is a quick overview of the document status, just to frame where we're at. We have a set of GitHub issues that have been filed that we want to discuss today to kind of get things continuing to move forward on this document. And then if we have time, we can have open discussion or questions and identify at least one immediate next step. Next, please.
All right.
Great. So this is the document status. Just to remind everyone, it was adopted shortly after the last IETF meeting. Woohoo! I copied from my personal repo into the DULT GitHub repo roughly a month ago, and that's been moved over. And Sean actually did a little bit cleanup recently on that, but it looks like it's all in good shape. And then there were some issues from the Apple Google individual draft that were relevant. So we had actually filed new issues in the DULT GitHub repo for the accessory protocol. And then on top of that, Siddharth and I just took another step and went through and filed some additional issues that we think we'll need to talk about, just to kind of keep things moving forward on what we think needs to change or needs to be discussed, etc. Next, please. So the issues we wanted to bring up for discussion today are these 6, actually 4. Item 4 has 2. So there's really 7 here that we want to talk about. Some of these I think are pretty easy. Some are maybe a little bit more difficult and will require additional discussion, but wanted to work through these 6 or 7 today. There are 11 issues filed on the GitHub repo right now. So this is the bulk of the ones that have been filed so far. Certainly not all the issues we need to address, but at least a good starter set. So at a high level, we want to talk about terminology within adult working group. There's an applicability section within this document we want to discuss. There is a sound maker requirement that we wanted to bring up here and revisit. Item 4 has 2 issues related to firmware update. So I want to talk about that. There's a really old issue, a pretty old issue, on printing non-serial number unique identifiers that was raised a while ago on the Apple Google individual draft. We'll talk about that. And then finally, want to add an NSC requirements section. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, first issue. So this one is an organizational issue, I think, first and foremost. We have a set of terminology defined in section 1.2. I imagine other documents have also a set of terminology. This is fairly well thought out. Again, this was copied over originally from the Apple Google individual draft. It defines things like, well, what does a platform mean? What is an accessory? What is an owner device? What is a non-owner device, etc. So there's really 2 questions here. One, I think all the documents want to be using the same language and same terminology. So if we agree to that, which I think that's just to make reading and understanding better, where do we want to put a section like this? Would this section live in each and every document and there be a copy and pasted version? Would there be one document that has it and all the other ones reference it? Would it be in a separate document that all 4 documents reference? So that hopefully those questions are pretty straightforward. I'm really just looking to what's kind of best practices and what's simplest within, IETF working groups here for organization of shared content.
So all of those options are done.
Do we have a preference?
Eric, go ahead.
Well, I certainly don't want to have a copy in all of them for the purpose of developing the documents. We might decide to shove them, cut, copy, paste it by value at the very end of the day, but we certainly shouldn't do it for now. I'm kind of indifferent. I'm kind of indifferent to which document it goes in. I think that the threat model I don't actually love, and so I'll probably be inclined to leave it to this one and people copy it. And then at the end of the day, we really decide we don't like that, we can do something about it. I think it should be the normative. I think it should be something which is part of the normative specification set, which the threat model may not in fact have to be. So I think I'd be inclined to leave it where it is and have the other authors, as one of the others, be happy to cite what's in here. And then if we decide that we hate that later, we can fix it.
Barry.
And this is Barry Lee. I agree with Ecker. I'd like to leave it here. The downside of that is that you don't really want to publish this as an RFC until all the other documents are done, because they will change terminology and stuff, add terminology, and you may want to be tweaking this. But then this becomes a gate for all the documents, and you can't publish any of them until this one goes out. So we just have to figure out the balance of that.
Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Camping. For what it's worth, I think it makes sense to have a standalone document just with terminology. Just makes it easier to maintain.
Tommy Polly?
Tommy Polly Apple. I think I agree with what Ecker was saying earlier. I mean, generally, for now, let's just have it here. Let's have it in the thing that is the kind of like the most technical specification. I think this is a long list of things. Potentially, if there are certain terms that end up being less important for like the fine details of the protocol and are more just architectural, then like an architecture document could define, like one of the other documents could define like some just like high level terminology for the overall system. But when you have very specific normative claims, it's good for anything that relates to the normative work to be defined ideally in that document. And I imagine as far as publishing, this will all have to be kind of like a cluster of documents. So like they're going to interdepend on each other. Recently we did the privacy pass RFCs, which has like two kind of normative protocol specs and an architecture, and the architecture has some terminology. The others refer to that, but they define kind of their own much more specific terminology. So that's a model that works.
DKG?
Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. If the group is fine with the documents being published in the cluster, then I don't think it really matters which document it goes in, as long as there's just one copy. If we really want to make sure one document is published early, we could try to move, when that's ready to publish, we could move it to that document if we think the terminology section is stable. But I don't know what we gain from that.
I find every time we try to publish something early, we end up having to go back and change it because something got changed at the end. So like we're expecting 4 documents at this point, maybe 5. That's not such a huge cluster. So if we can keep that number, it seems like that's pretty manageable. And again, like I think if we have to think about progressing these things to the ISG, if we progress the finding document without the other 3, they're just not going to read it. They're going to be like, where are the other ones? So I think it's just we're inevitably going to be set up that way. But that's okay because luckily it's the author pool small and everybody's talking to each other, so we're good. So cool. I think you got your answer on that one, which is leave it there.
Great, easy. So second question on this page, last question listed. Actually, could we stay on that one?
Yeah, sorry.
John, if that's okay. Do we have any volunteers to review it?
France. Barry has raised his hand. Put that in the minutes.
Great. Maybe the other authors of the other documents would be interested too.
Yeah, I did try to explain this to everyone that like basically if we're all going to go together, that they all kind of got to help each other. So there'll be some inner review, I believe. They may be voluntold.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Barry. Thank you ahead of time, other document authors.
Yeah.
All right, we can go to the next slide then.
Okay,
Please.
great.
So this one is probably a little bit harder than the last one. So we have an applicability section that was, again, brought over from the Apple Google individual draft. Its heritage actually goes back to an Apple MFI spec for Apple Find My Network accessories. The applicability section basically details that there are small trackers like a Chipotle One or an Apple AirTag where they could be easily hidden on someone's person or belongings, and that the set of requirements and best practices within a document is strictly bound to things of that size. But if something is large and not easily discoverable, that maybe the set of requirements could be relaxed in some regard. Furthermore, it goes on to define what small and not easily discoverable is in this document based on the volume and the volume alone, or the dimensions or the volume. And it doesn't reason about other things that one may imagine being meaningful here. For example, the battery life of the accessory or the cost of it. So wanted to really open this one up for discussion on, do we want to have some sort of delineation based on size or other attributes where these requirements, the documents would be strictly bound to, or do we want to not reason about that? Again, the concrete example is, a tracker like an AirTag or a Chipotle One, really different in terms of potential abuse, in terms of like planting on someone's person or belongings, versus a bicycle that maybe has a Bluetooth tracker embedded in it. It's hard to plant a bicycle in someone's belongings or on their person without them knowing.
Go ahead, Ecker.
Questions? Yeah, I'd like to hear feedback and thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think Nick's leading up to the same point I'm about to make, which is that the hook for this, right, is actually the finding protocol, right? Namely, like, we're not IETF can't like mandate that can't generically mandate that trackers you've never heard of before and don't use our technologies like do anything at all, anything in particular, right? And so the underlying logic here, I mean, it's a little weird because we have this document spread is actually not that conducive to reasoning about the protocol. It was really designed to bring up the problem space rather than break up the logic. But I mean, the way to think about this is from a technical specification, for a technical situation, we have, if you are a system which emits beacons, which can be used in the finding protocol described with these documents, then you must conform to the requirements in this document, which tell you about how often you beacon and blah blah blah, right? So I think, given the way this is structured, I think what I'd probably do is and I can't remember the structure of this document specifically, but there's like a section that describes the things you have to do that are required to make the unwanted tracking correction work, as opposed to making the protocol work as a whole. And I would hook the applicability out of those things. Say, if you implement the document here, like this whole document, then you must do these particular things described in 2.1 if you're small, right? So, for instance, if you're big, if you're big, maybe you don't have to ever use a stable identifier or something. I don't know, so I think that's the way I try to structure this. I think these particular sets of things seems like basically okay, and I'm not too, and I think it will probably cut out everything, all the things that are like battery lifetime, like blah. I mean, like it's already the case. Like a Garmin, you know, in reach is low enough better than to be a threat. So I don't think it really matters.
Terms and conditions. Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Camping. I won't dispute Brent's logic that you can't easily plant a bicycle on someone, but you might be able to enable a tracker in a bicycle that the person riding it didn't know it had a tracking capability. So I think the size things may be a red herring here. If it's got a built-in tracking capability in the bike, that's just as intrusive as an AirTag sort of planted in your luggage or something. So I'm not convinced, despite the fact you can't hide a bicycle. That's unarguable.
I think that's a really good point. I think it also has to do with like how well things are marketed and labeled, because a lot of people, we see that a lot in domestic violence, that abusers misuse technologies that survivors don't know how they function. Oh, sorry.
Nick.
Nick Doty, Center for Democracy and Technology. So I was making the point that Ecker was making, that maybe we can't have this in the spec, but now I'm coming to a different conclusion, which is maybe we should be describing it in the operation of the finding network. That if you're a device that's passing on these reports about trackers, it seems like our goal here is to provide some requirements about the trackers implementing a protocol. So it seems like that's a place to say you need to implement this other accessory protocol, and you need to do it under these conditions. And I think I'd be inclined with Andrew that I'm not sure that the size is as significant.
Maggie.
Hi, yeah, I was just gonna add that, like with the bicycle example, if the hardware that was used to implement the tracking, if that could easily be detached from the bicycle, for example, because it's small, it's just sitting in the stem of the bicycle, then also that could be used. So that's another consideration in arguing that it should still have to implement it.
Yeah, I fully agree with that one.
All right, Eric, back to you.
So I fear I'm about to open up a much bigger can of worms, and so the chair feel free to tell me to have this discussion later. But I think we should reconsider this document structure. This was largely done based on breakdown of work, but it's turning out not to map very well to like the underlying logical structure of the system. So I think we should reconsider whether we really want to have four separate documents. I think in particular, like the breakdown in the finding and the accessory protocol, like just isn't really coherent. And you can see that because like all kinds of stuff in like our document, we're trying to define the stuff that goes in the accessory protocol. I don't want to speak for Christina, who I imagine is asleep, but I'd be more than happy to have the material that we've done merged into the accessory protocol, or some master some unified document if that's what people were up for, and I don't feel like I have to like have my hand on the pen. I guess I want to float that the chairs may want to think about that at some point in the future, because like exactly this conversation we're having like really only makes sense because of the split of the documents, and I'm not sure the split of the documents makes sense.
Okay. All right. So we
Sean, Eric, I'm kind of waiting. Do you something you want to think about?
I think what I heard was some people agree and some people don't. So they want to edit these. And typically, I like to channel my inner Ecker and say PR, taken. So if you submit a PR, we'll go from there. So if people have some ideas about what they think it ought to say, let's write some text and get it going.
Okay. And then how about, I guess Ecker had a broader comment on, or is the organization of the documents what we want?
Well, so we do this, sometimes do it early and later. And I think like at this point, I think we should just get going since we're basically all at OO versions. if we start getting to a point where it's clear that like this should go there and that should go here, and we need 6 documents as opposed to 4, okay, we can do that split, but like we just started. So I'm hoping that, maybe we can do that later. Does that sound reasonable? Just like, let's get going a little farther down the path before we do that.
Okay. Yeah, maybe, Ecker, you may be right, and maybe it'll become self-evident to others as we go through. Yeah, again, happy to reorganize as needed.
Maggie, I guess Maggie's in the queue too.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of the reason it's in this document is because this document came before all of the other ones. And also, I think we changed the order of presentations, but one of the things I also wanted to talk about was a lot of these requirements. I had kind of the same question, where should all these things go? So I'm just trying to say that I think that we will also hopefully get to this later as well.
Okay. Deb's getting up to tell us what she wants.
No, I'm not. And I think probably hats off, right? So I think you get all the words down on paper first and then figure out where they go.
Yeah.
Where do they best fit, right?
Yeah.
But write the words first so you know what it is you want to say, and then you can divvy up the organization afterwards. I mean, because you have just started, just like write it down.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Let's get out the door and get down the road a little farther.
Okay. Cool. So I'd implore people to throw PRs if they're have great ideas.
Well, what I also like about this too is it actually forces the other authors to read the other drafts, right? Well, where is this and how to put that in there? I mean, it's a little more work on them, but unfortunately, that's what they kind of volunteer for.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is an issue around do we really need a sound maker or not? So this one also might be a little bit controversial, but wanted to discuss here. I think the motivation for reconsidering this or considering this and having a discussion about it is as trackers get smaller and smaller, think size of a penny or something of that order down the road, having the physical space to put a speaker in that is sufficiently loud becomes challenging. The counterpoint to that is like, well, that's the question, what does a speaker do? What does it allow you to do if you have a speaker as a must requirement in an accessory, which is how it's written right now? There's really 2 things I think that it provides. The speaker lets you physically locate the accessory once the non-owner has been alerted to the presence of it. So it creates a means to find it. That's if you have a device, if you have an Android device, an iOS device, or whatever platform that supports these standards. It also provides a second benefit if you don't happen to have a device at all. So maybe you're a young kid, you don't have a phone or watch or anything like that. Having a speaker provides a means to, it's imperfect, but provides a means to let you know that it is available, so the accessories around you, the way the spec has been written, there's a requirement that, hey, if the accessory has been away from its owner for too long and has moved or some timeout has occurred, that it would autonomously play a sound without needing a device nearby. So it provides that kind of one of the very few protections we have for people without devices. So again, I don't feel strongly about this being removed. I actually personally think it's hard to remove the speaker, but this is something that Siddiq and I thought we should bring up in this forum because we have had other people mention it at other times. So question for the group, do we think this is malleable in any way, shape, or form, that we could remove the must requirement to including a speaker? Or is it something we really need to have?
Go ahead, Nick.
I pasted a link to a longer blog post from a colleague into the chat. I think in particular, we need to think about the implications for people with disabilities who are disproportionately affected by this kind of unwanted tracking. For some of those people, the speaker might be especially important because if you're hard of vision, you can't easily look through your bag and find the thing. But but also they're going to be like, I actually think we should be talking about beyond speakers. Like there are people who don't have easy access to hear things. And so if a tag is visually hidden, playing a sound might not help them. And so maybe we should be, if we're concerned about safety, maybe we should be thinking about things like haptics or things like that. So I think for safety purposes, we should be going towards more findability requirements, not fewer.
This is Daniel Kahn Gilmore. The only argument I've heard for removing this is, gee, the manufacturers want to make smaller and smaller things. I think our goal here is to tell the manufacturers what is responsible to make. I don't see how that's a compelling argument at all that it should be removed. Why remove it? It's not an argument that, I mean, they might also say, well, we don't want to make things that follow this protocol. Okay, you can say that, but we think the responsible thing to do is to have it be detectable by people who don't have devices. And I agree with Nick that we should think about other things, flashing lights and haptics as well.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that instead of sound maker, we just call it notifications or something like that, where it's like whatever it is, it jiggles or beeps or flashes or whatever. And yeah.
There is if you kind of dig into the paragraph, there's actually a loudness spec that was thrown on there too, just to make sure. Having a sound maker, great, but if it's too quiet, not good. So I think when you talk about whether it's haptics or light or sound, you got to have some specificity on, like, is it bright enough? Is the haptics causing enough vibration? Is the sound loud enough to make it hearable, seeable, feelable?
Andrew?
Don't have a particular issue with this other than I predict a market in things like this, which my AirTag is inside, mainly so it doesn't get scratched in my case, but would be helpful in blocking the flashing lights and probably muffling the sound. So I think we just need to be mindful that there will be accessories for the accessories, and not just rely on those and nothing else.
That's another topic. I maybe put a pin in that for someone on the threat vector side to make sure they're staying on top of. If it has a sound maker and it's loud enough, and we agree that's that's all a hard requirement to include. What are we doing about people intentionally limiting the ability for it to make sound as designed? Okay.
Hold on,
great.
Sadika.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Jumped in there.
Go ahead, Sadika.
Hello, just wanted to wrap up here. So there is potentially a path to include another way of maybe haptics was mentioned, right? As long as we specify the technical requirements for it. Is it the consensus that we have right now? Am I getting it right? We are not looking at completely removing it, which is pretty understandable. But alternatives are maybe on the table, can be discussed.
Yes, but I think if we do put them on, I think what we're saying is you have to like provide some technical requirements about what
Right.
it is. It's not just the lights turns on, and how bright, etc. Right. All right.
Okay. Great. Let's move to the next one then.
All right.
Pretty clear. So this is actually two issues that go back, a year-ish too. I think they have their heritage both in emails on the Unwanted Tracker at IETF.org email list from Ecker. The issue here is the text in the document right now that talks about allowing firmware updates is very terse and very non-specific about how, what, where, when, and why. So the motivation for having a section in this document that allows an accessory to have firmware updates is, or support them, is, there could be bug fixes, new features, a variety of things that could, if the right firmware, meaning it's authentic, it's from the manufacturer, has been verified, can be loaded onto the accessory in a secure and safe way, then that's something that's a net positive, because it's presumably making the tracker better or making it more safe, etc. The challenge here, I think, with the wording, with the very terse wording, is it doesn't call out like all the things you could have maybe imagined would be allowed, so which were not intended. So I think things like allowing the owner of an accessory to arbitrarily put on arbitrary firmware was not what we wanted to allow, because you could imagine putting on arbitrary firmware that violates or breaks all the great safety things that we're specifying here, and could then provide an accessory that is not compliant. Or you could imagine doing even more malicious things with arbitrary firmware. So Ecker, I'm going to call on you to maybe provide more detail, if you recall the long discussion on the set of issues you filed quite a while ago. But I think the comment here I want to make is I'd like to flush this section out so that we can allow authentic, secure firmware updates to accessories. I think we should have the threat model call out what the risks are if that's done incorrectly or correctly, or I guess incorrectly, and then continue to fill this section in on how to make this happen. So then the questions for the group are there other things we want to talk about here that I haven't kind of given an overview on firmware updates? People think firmware updates are a bad idea, or are there other issues or sub issues I missed in the kind of overview of this section?
I think firmware updates are a fine idea. I think that the requirement here, I don't think we need to provide a mechanism. Normally we wouldn't say software endpoints should be upgradable, like people do that or don't do that. I think the requirement here is that whatever mechanism the manufacturer uses to provide firmware updates should not allow for should not allow third parties to cause the accessory to violate the requirements in the specification. That's the relevant text, right? And if someone tags me, I can send some text about that. But I mean, that's the relevant thing is that the manufacturer has a requirement, and the manufacturer has, as is obviously the case, we can't make anybody do anything. But I mean, the assumption is the manufacturer's job is to maintain conformity with specification. And so we assume the manufacturer firmware is conformant with specification. The requirement here is that third parties not be able to replace the firmware without the manufacturer's assistance. With that said, at some point we're going to have to talk about and this is in the finding draft, mechanisms that attempt to ensure that things are legitimate devices, which may in fact end up being tied into the firmware discussion at some point, or may not be.
Cool. Yeah, that'll make sense to me. And that's what's intended, although not obvious from the single sentence. Okay. Any other counter viewpoints? Any other things that people want to say on this particular topic?
All right, go to the next
Great.
one.
Okay. This is another one that is pretty old, and I actually copied over the original text verbatim because it's maybe a little bit less obvious what's being talked about here. The original text was from CST APL back in December of 2023. The issue at a high level was titled "Printing Non-Serial Number Unique Identifiers on the Accessory" and the challenges that the current document has with respect to that. So the way the current document is written, there's really two methods in which you can have an identifier that's traceable, that's unique to that accessory and traceable back to, say, a time of pairing, who actually paired it. So the two methods are maybe the first one is the obvious one. There's a serial number. I think we all typically know what that means. It's a unique set of strings or characters, right? That doesn't change, and is, if you look at all the accessories of that make and model, or maybe all the accessories altogether, it's a unique identifier. There's no issue there from what I can tell in any of what was called out here. It's the latter, a second way that we've allowed for identification of accessory, and that's with an identifier that rotates over time. So that is a more privacy preserving method to have, again, a single sequence of identifiers that are tied back to an individual accessory. But because it is rotating over time, you can't print a single number or a single sequence of numbers and letters onto the accessory itself. So this, as it's written here, if you look at the text on the right-hand side, we basically say if there's a serial number, meaning it's a static unique identifier, it needs to be printed on. And then if you read the rest of the text, it's not required to be printed if it's not static over time. And just for a little bit of background too, the way that this identifier, so it's kind of a belt and suspenders approach to why would you want to print it? Why would you want to also have it be electronically available if you can print it? The idea, I think, is, hey, if I happen to be stalked, I happen to be tracked, and I need evidence of eventually who is tracking me. One piece of evidence could be, well, certainly having the tracker is great, but then having a unique identifier from the tracker that I could maybe go to law enforcement, and if I decide to go that route, and ask them to help me figure out who is tracking me, that the unique identifier helps to trace back to that individual. The fact it's printed, great. Obviously that could be printed, etched, whatever, that could be removed. So having electronic means via NFC tap or Bluetooth LE provides kind of backup. So pause there. That's the kind of background, that's the issue. And I think the specific question is, are people okay if there are unique identifiers that are not printable or not etchable or whatever means that it could be physically laid onto the accessory, and only an electronic version is available, or do we really need to have both?
All right, Nick. Nick, you're up first.
Sorry, this might sound like I have a strong opinion, but it actually is a question. If someone implemented the non-static identifier, and then someone found an instance of that and smashed it with their boot, which I think is one of the recommended ways. I mean, I understand it's probably not like if you're doing everything right, we wouldn't tell people to do that, but that's going to be one of the ways. How would that person then identify the number?
Right. So I think in your example, Nick, is the smashing of the boot makes it inoperable electronically via either Bluetooth retrieval or NFC retrieval of that identifier.
Right.
Yeah. So right, that would be a problem. There'd be then no way to identify it if you couldn't fix it. I guess in your example, you probably can't fix it. I guess the counterpoint to that, though, is if it was, let's say it was literally just printed on or etched on, those are both defeatable pretty easily too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a good argument for you should have it both printed and electronic, but I am concerned about only having it electronic because of I found it and then I smashed it.
I guess the other point is you would have to smash it in a way, and maybe this is possible, but you'd have to smash it in a way where it still operates as a tracker, but just doesn't emit this piece of information, which may be quite challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable for manufacturers to give advice on here's how to remove a battery or here's how to disable it. But I think we should just admit lots of people aren't going to carefully follow the disablement instructions.
Ecker?
Yes, so I think I'm glad DKG's in line behind me because I think I'm very, very interested in his thoughts here. The purpose of so first of all, these devices, even when they have apparently a rotating identifier, actually have a unique identifier underlying the rotating identifier. It's just not published. So they all have a unique identifier of some kind. In fact, that's how some of the system works. It's a unique identifier that drives the generation of the rotating keys. So the relevant question is it a problem to reveal some static identifier, which may or may not be coupled to that unique identifier on the surface of the device? The reason why we do not, and I think we've already been through why there are good reasons why you might want that, and I think the question now becomes, are there reasons why you would not want that? And the reason why you have a rotate identifier on the device on the sort of radio emissions of the device is to prevent the device from being re-identified at some point in the future easily. Hence all the discussion around the multi-dealer secret sharing paper. It's not clear to me that really applies to the situation where you have physical possession of the device and are able to verify it's the same device. So I think that it's not clear to me why there's a problem with having a static identifier on the surface of the device from a privacy perspective. We certainly do live with lots of situations where if you actually can lay eyes on something, it has a serial number and you're able to see it's the same thing. DKG is very good at coming up with things like this. So maybe he's got some idea of when it actually is a privacy threat to the user to have a static identifier printed on the surface of the device. But I'm having trouble thinking of a good one that isn't countervailed by the much more stronger argument that it allows you to readily identify when you find a device which you know shouldn't be there, readily identify who that person was. So I'd be inclined, unless we can come up with some user-facing reason why this is a privacy threat, to retain this requirement.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. I don't see a problem with having identifiers printed on these devices. We're saying this is how you make a responsible device. A responsible device is a serial number. And I don't think, it certainly doesn't have the same privacy implications as a constant radio emission of a unique identifier. What I would be really sad is if we try to resolve this in the other way, where we say, well, we've already got the static identifier printed on the device. Why would we rotate the radio beacon? So I don't see why we can't have both. You might want to say, if the concern is about the modification of the device, you might want to say that the serial number should be printed on the internals as well as on the outside, so that a forensic examination of the device, even if it had been scratched off on the outside, would reveal that the chip, which is harder to tamper with, that's locked on the inside, once you pry it open, there's the same identifier. But I don't see why we would care about having a static identifier printed on it as long as it's not a radio beacon.
Andrew?
Yeah, hi, Andrew Campling. Agree with what was just said, and I suppose pointing out the obvious when we talk about concerns about privacy preserving identifiers for a purpose of finding out who planted them on me. Yeah, surely the whole point of having this identifier is to uncover the identity. So I think not having a static printed identifier would seem perverse, given the use case that's trying to be tackled here.
Okay. Any other perspectives people want to share? All that makes sense to me, though. Okay.
Next.
Great. And quick, this is the last one of the issues. Just want to do a quick time check while we're here, Sean.
I mean, we have till 11:30, right? So
Yeah.
we still have another hour and 15 minutes. So
great. Okay, cool. So this final issue that we prepared is I think hopefully a very easy one. This is more of a clerical issue. So on the right-hand side, there's an NFC requirements section. I'll maybe talk about that a little bit more in a second. When we were recently working on the Apple and Google individual draft, we took that document, we forked it off to create document number 3 of the accessory protocol for this group, for the working group. But we realized shortly after that fork that an NFC requirements section was just missing. It's pretty fundamental to making sure if you include NFC in the accessory, like what NFC standards you need to conform to. It goes on even to talk about how to configure the NFC accessory properly so it's easily readable by any NFC reader like that you find at an iPhone or an Android device, and even add stuff that's not really hardware specific. If you kind of read through the full list of bullets here, things that are privacy preserving requirements for NFC, like you should not be able to read a tag if the tracker or the accessory is in a packaging. So we felt really strongly this needed to get added to the Apple and Google draft. It's currently not in the DULT working group draft. I'd like to get it added in. Any concerns about adding that in from this group? And I think it would have to be restructured a little bit because again, it's not just hardware requirements for NFC. So hopefully this is a very easy question.
I mean, this is like, does anybody object? Speak now, otherwise he's going to do it.
Yeah.
Going once, going twice. TKG, yeah.
This is Daniel Gilmore. I'm just a little bit confused about the language here. I mean, this says for accessories that include NFC, they must use a program one. Like, well, I don't understand enough about NFC to know the difference here.
So,
but could there be something that uses NFC that doesn't meet these requirements? Like they're going to be type 1 NFC or something like that? So what we're really saying is you must not use some subset of NFC, right?
Yeah, so the wording definitely could be improved. The intention is if you decide to include NFC functionality into your accessory, which is an option given the way the document is written today, you need Bluetooth, but NFC is just an additive radio that you could decide to add. That if you add NFC, you've got to follow a set of things to do it correctly so that it's easily readable by other devices like phones and NFC readers.
Okay, the wording is a bit strange, right? To say you must, but there's this condition where you can't because you haven't included NFC. So that it just feels a little bit clunky. I don't know how to make it better because I don't know enough about NFC.
Yeah. Acknowledge the clunkiness. There's a couple parts that are clunky in this, so we definitely want to fix that. So I will take the action to create a PR that cleans it up and adds it into the draft, and hopefully people can review it.
All right, so that was the
Great.
last two. Yeah.
That's the last one. The final slide is really just if we have extra time and people wanted to bring forth other issues. So Siddharth and I had not prepared any other content on specific issues, but there's, if we have time, we can talk about those.
Anybody? There's like 5 more slides, but I think it's like next steps.
Those are like, please back up. Thank you. Questions. Yeah. Okay. Then if there's nothing else that people want to feel very motivated to talk about today, I just want to implore everyone again, please go and file more issues at GitHub. We would love that. And let's continue discussion on unwanted trackers at IETF.org.
Yeah, I mean, for everybody else, what we've kind of directed the authors that, if they find issues to submit text that they think will answer the issue. We're not just going to wait for people to suggest things and then people can review it. And, right. contribution driven. So at that point, it's where we got to get done and get something published. So we'll go from there. All right, cool. We'll
Cool,
switch
thank you so
gears
much.
here. Sorry,
Oh, thank you so much.
no worries.
Yeah.
All right, Maggie, you're up next. Let me switch over here. Threat model. There we go. Confirm my selection. All right, great.
Are you sharing the PDF or the live slides?
The PDF.
Okay, I did make some changes during.
You did make some changes. All right. Well,
Yeah,
if you
just because I want to
can
update
go,
it
I
based on
can
what
make
people
that
were talking
happen.
about.
Give me a second. Excuse me. We have time. I apologize for making you watch me do all this, but hey, it's how it works. Maggie slides. Where did I put them? All righty. Let me do this. I will get the other version uploaded in a second, folks. Share my screen. I'm going to do that. I'm going to accept some permissions because I love it. The red model. I think it's this one. Allow. There we go. Those are the live slides.
Okay, thank you. I just want to reflect the conversation we literally just had.
There we go. All right, cool.
Okay, yeah, so this is work is in collaboration with Jesse Lowell, who is not here because it is a very unfortunate time zone for the East Coast. Okay, next slide, please. So a lot of this stuff is review from last time, and then there's new stuff. So wherever it says review, that's review. So this is also review, though I forgot to call it review. But kind of the motivation for like the work that we have been doing is that in order for the working group to be successful, we have to have a good understanding of the unwanted tracking threat model, and then also a good understanding of how people might attack the threat model, which is some of the new stuff. So we have a document, and this document has a bit of a taxonomy of unwanted tracking, and then also some of the things that we think should be in scope, and some design considerations. And in this presentation, I'm going to review that stuff and then also talk in more detail about kind of how to take that to the next level of in terms of technical specification and likely threats. Okay, next slide, please. And so here's some definitions, which we will have to make sure to compare with the ones from the other document. But when I say the word active scanning, I mean a search for location trackers manually initiated by a user. When I say passive scanning, I mean something that runs in the background. So that's the ones that a lot of us are very familiar with. And then when I say tracking tag, I'm talking about a small concealable device that broadcasts location data to other devices. Next slide, please. Okay, and so I guess Sean didn't flash this up, but I just wanted to include this because this is the DULT architecture that we've kind of all agreed on, and that there's many different aspects that are kind of considered in scope for the broad network, including enrollment in the network, broadcasting presence, all the states that you can kind of read on the side there.
All right,
okay.
For reference.
Next slide.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of the threat model taxonomy, a lot of this work was what Jesse did. Basically, we're considering that attackers and victims can have different levels of expertise, access to resources, technological safeguards, and also different levels of proximity. So, for example, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that an attacker might be easily to be able to physically place something on a person, and that might lead to different threat model than if someone is not easily able to do that. And then in terms of the tracking tag usage, it could also be possible that an attacker is the only person who's using a tracker, or it could be that the victim is also using their own tracker, and we would have to find some way to figure out which ones are friendly and which ones are not, right? And we did a bunch of work on some example scenarios. You can find those in the document or in the past presentation from 2 IETFs ago. Next slide, please. Okay, so, and again, some of this was talked about in the previous section about like what kinds of things we think should be in scope. One of the things is that we're kind of thinking anything that we're focused on Bluetooth right now, but we think some of this might be able to apply more broadly to anything that broadcasts its location to other consumer devices. And then in terms of attacker profiles, this is one of the things that we really need to start drilling down on what we think the realistic things that need to be in scope. And so some of this stuff is vague and I think should get more specific as we go along. So certainly if someone is using a platform native tracking applications, for example, like the Find My device, they've placed a tag on someone and they're just using the built-in Apple Find My service or equivalent on Android, that should be in scope. And then some physical modifications to the tag makes sense maybe to be in scope. For example, disabling speaker, because we know that on certain devices that's easy to do. And then have this kind of phrase non-nation state level alterations to firmware. And I think I would be beneficial to have people's thoughts on how to kind of make that more specific. But basically we're thinking stuff that is likely or not incredibly difficult for someone to modify. And then in terms of the victim profiles, we think that we want to have a wide range of victim profiles to be in scope. So regardless of the level of expertise or resources of the user, we should do as much as we can to try to protect them. So for example, we're talking about someone with disabilities. We would want to make sure that that was also considered in scope. Next slide, please.
I mean, I guess I just want to pause here. Like,
Yeah,
does anyone think that this is wrong? Right. Because if we're not, again, I just, Brent?
Just a note, the easily concealable part per the earlier discussion, we probably want to amend that potentially.
Yeah, good idea.
TKG?
Sorry for the lack of Q button here. The one other, if we're nitpicking on the wording here, 2 other consumer devices seems to imply that we are not interested in things that would broadcast, say, to a commercial network of rebroadcasting things. I know that Find My currently operates by borrowing the bandwidth of other devices, but there are places that have sufficient infrastructural deployments that are not consumer devices that an accessory could broadcast its location by. And I don't know, if those are Bluetooth, it seems like it's the same mechanism to me. But I don't know what the word consumer is doing there. What it
I'm happy to
means.
be more broad. I think we were just trying to be appropriately narrow, but we can be more broad.
Yeah. Brent?
Yeah, I'm also going to nitpick a little bit. So I was thinking about the word broadcast a little bit, and there's some issues there. I think what you mean, Maggie, is it's available to. Well, okay. Let me talk about the issue I have, and then we can go back and figure out if there's a way around it. So you can imagine what broadcasting mean. It's transmitted from the accessory to the owner. The location is transmitted, but that could be broadcast in a way that's hard to intercept. So the specific example here is like a GPS tracker that also has like LTE connectivity. It could not have Bluetooth in it at all, and it's via an encrypted channel over LTE broadcasting the location back to the owner. Were you thinking that needs to be in scope and we need to find a way to intercept that broadcast?
I think, yeah, I think Jess and I were debating whether or not we should explicitly put the word Bluetooth in here or not. And I think that might address the concern if we were to do that. Right. Like basically one of the things that we're not sure about right now is everyone's been focusing a lot on Bluetooth, and the question is whether or not we should just explicitly say, hey, we're only going to focus on Bluetooth, or if we want to be more expansive or not.
So I think in Brisbane, I think the discussion, we said we were going to start with Bluetooth and then move out to others. So I think long as we put those disclaimers in there somewhere, like, we're starting to look at this, I think it's probably okay to slap Bluetooth in there to make it more explicit. Because otherwise we're boiling the ocean. Barry?
This is Barry Leva. I'm trying to tease out a little bit of what Brent was asking. And maybe, were you going for a distinction between broadcast in its literal sense of broad as opposed to targeted transmission? Because that may be something that we want to look at.
Yeah, I guess what I was giving a counterexample of what would be another example in my mind of broadcasting over like a cellular network, that is probably broadcasting, and maybe that's broadcasting to everyone. I guess is a potential interpretation for me as to broadcasting, and that that type of tracker that did not have Bluetooth in just would be really hard to have conform to this set of documents that we're producing, because it brings it a whole other set of challenges on how do you track a non-Bluetooth capable accessory that is not broadcasting in the clear and is encrypted.
That
Yeah,
might be why Jesse put in consumer device. I think I'm remembering now. I think we want to emphasize that it's a peer-to-peer network in some way.
But I guess part of what I'm trying to tease out is that you can broadcast a Bluetooth signal. You can also target a Bluetooth signal to a paired device or whatever. And are we trying to make a distinction there or not? And so maybe we want to say transmit rather than broadcast to get around that, or I don't know. But anyway, that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, that's another good point too. And I think for Sean's guidance and reminder at the beginning, if we start with just Bluetooth, then I think that makes this easier.
All right, great. I mean, yeah. So I mean, I think basically what I heard is people are generally happy. We need to get a little more specific, but I think that's at least we're moving the ball forward. So thanks. All right, let me get in the right screen and then go dink.
Okay, and we want to expressly define some things out of scope. So because there's a lot of like related tech abuse things, but we want to emphasize like what the specific protocol is meant to address. So I listed a couple things there, and then there's other things that we thought it might make sense to define as out of scope. For example, if someone has a jailbroken device or something like that. But we wanted to be very careful not to define any, at least as far up front, any of the victim profiles as out of scope. We want to be able to accommodate as many things as we can. We might not practically be able to, but we at least want to start from that place. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this? Just to do the same thing as the last slide.
Brent?
Yeah, just a comment. It seems, quick read of this and memory of what's in the charter, it seems to be consistent with what's in the charter. So maybe Maggie, the follow-on question is, if you find any discrepancies in what's in the charter versus what you want to do, that seems like a really important thing for us to discuss.
Yes, that's a good point. But cool. Other than that, that looks good. All right.
Okay, and I think this might be one of the last slides where like all this stuff is actually in text already in document 4. So based on these comments, I can start making some updates to that. And then soon we're going to get to the new stuff. So, and this, again, this is like the very high design considerations. So right now, different platforms have different ways of providing notifications. So we think that the final protocol should maintain that. So there should be some sort of active scanning mechanism, some sort of passive sending notification sounds. There should be a variety of different things in order to accommodate for a variety of different threats or use cases. And then the other things is that we want our system to be able to account for scenarios where attackers have high expertise, proximity, and or access to resources, and similarly where scenarios where a victim has low expertise, access to resources, and access to technological safeguards. And the other big thing, which a lot of people have focused on, is avoiding privacy compromises, and we have to get specific about these things, which is what's coming up. And then a variety of notification modalities. So this actually also came up earlier today, the idea that we want to think about what our non-audio options for deaf victims might look like. Okay, you can go to the next slide, yeah. Okay, so that was all the stuff that we already have in document 4. And then I was kind of inspired by the presentation from Gabrielle at our interim meeting about how can we kind of take these higher level things and get more specific. And so I came up with 4 different things and talked them over with Jesse, but before we write things down, I figured it would be useful to get people's input and then also talk about where these kinds of things should go once they're written. And so I kind of organized that into 4 different categories. So the attacks on the architecture, some unwanted location tracking scenarios, trying to be really specific about how that might translate to technical specifications, design constraints, and then design requirements. So you can go to the next slide. So these are some of the threats that I have either thought of myself or that other people have said. One of the big ones that came up at the interim meeting was the idea of someone trying to get through the multi-dealer secret sharing algorithm by basically just putting multiple tags on the same person. So, and apparently that already happens anyway, as Alexander was saying at the interim meeting as well. So if someone wants to track someone, they, instead of just putting one in their car, they might put like 2 or 3 in their car. And so we need, whatever system that we develop needs to be robust to the fact that there might be multiple tags being planted, not just one. Additionally, there's a non-compliant tag, which is very broad because I could accommodate be a lot of different things. So I included both like a hardware example and a firmware example. So the speaker disablement is something that already happens in certain devices, but then you could imagine if firmware is not protected, firmware updates are not appropriately protected, then there could potentially be altered firmware that would take a tag that might have been released that was compliant and make it non-compliant. And so the protocol would have to handle that in some way. And then remote advertisement monitoring is kind of just my way of describing the privacy threat, which is that maybe there's some sort of beacon that is receiving broadcasts that's like in a tree near someone's house or something like that. And then the last one is a spoofed tag. So it's not a tag that was purchased that was already compliant, but it's a tag that someone created themselves that they want to try to get onto the network that doesn't have the safeguards. And I also, maybe we could stop here and see if people have any other ideas for threats that we should include on this list.
TKG, you found the button.
This is Daniel Gilmore. I'm not sure that I understand how a non-compliant tag can be in scope. We have a scope of what we're trying to work on here, and we're saying if the devices that are involved play by these rules, we think that that is a responsible deployment. I understand that we want to defend against a spoof tag, right? We want to say that architecture will be able to tell whether the tag is doing the thing it's supposed to do, but a tag that's I'm not sure I understand how a non-compliant tag can be in scope without pulling in all of the rest of the universe, right? I mean, say I take a tag and I modify it so that it's doing GPS and LTE. It's in scope now because it's non-compliant, because it's doing something. I don't understand how we're actually scoping this work if all non-compliant tags are in scope.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
I don't necessarily think all of non-compliant tags should be in scope, but I do think that in at least the specific examples I gave that we should be able to account for. So if, like right now, someone can buy a location tag and can disconnect the speaker, and I think that we should then not just say, well, you've disconnected the speaker, so I guess you're just going to get stalked now. I think there should be certain threats that we should be able to consider, and the whole point of this discussion is to figure out which ones we should say, okay, well, if they do this, we should still have a backup so that there's still other ways. So for example, if you disable the speaker, maybe there's still some sort of phone notification that's available, right? So we want to figure out which ones should we be able to account for by having redundancies in the protocol, and which ones would you say, okay, well, we can't do anything about it.
Okay, then, okay. I mean, I agree. We want to figure out redundancies in the protocol. That makes sense to me. But as it's listed here, it looks like we're saying that all of the possible things are somehow in scope. And I struggle.
Maybe we should say like modified tag or something like it. But what I was thinking was a tag that someone purchased from the store that was compliant, and then they altered it in some way to make it non-compliant in one or more ways.
Yeah, I think we need to think about what that does to the protocol for sure. I don't know that we can handle all of those things. But, yeah.
Eric?
Yeah, well, I guess a couple of things. First, I mean, in scope doesn't mean we're going to do it, but it means it needs to be considered. And I think, unfortunately, I want to see any analysis. If there's an attack we're unable to prevent, like for instance, you wrap it in aluminum foil, and somehow the aluminum foil stops the detection, but doesn't stop the use of the tag, then that would be like bad news, and we want to document that. The speaker is the obvious example of that. but I think that like there's I think they're being there's the thing we're trying to prevent here is someone from readily introducing a new device which does not conform to the specifications of these protocol, the specifications as much as possible, right? And that if and if they are able to readily introduce it, that hopefully it doesn't introduce too many threats to users, right? So that's the thing we're trying to capture in this text, I would imagine. So I guess I think of it as being sort of two pieces. One is it should be hard to readily introduce a new device that like you just totally control and doesn't conform to any of the like radio requirements. And then if you introduce a new device which doesn't conform to the physical requirements, like the speaker, because like you've removed the speaker or you wrapped it in foam, that there are other ways to detect the system that doesn't detect the speaker. So I think those are probably the two things we want to state, though I'm not quite sure how to get them into the text.
Brent?
Yeah, thanks. I copied in the chat the line item in the program of work from the charter that I think is relevant here. I'll just read it off quickly. Item 5, design mechanisms to ensure that devices that do not correctly implement or adhere to the DULT protocol can be detected and excluded from being trackable via crowdsourced location networks. So my understanding of those words are, yes, non-compliant tags are definitely in scope. I think that was something we actually debated quite a bit quite a few months ago. So that's clearly in scope from the charter from my point of view.
Sidika?
Thinking if there is a way to distinguish, an example is speaker disabled versus altered firmware. Speaker disabled, lots of videos on YouTube, right? I think a relatively not super tech-wavy user can actually do it, versus altering firmware can be a bit more challenging, I suppose. It might relate back to your previous slide on the attacker, not in scope attacker, which is like the complicated type. So it's still not very easy to well define this, but I guess it's still introduces some sort of distinction of what is more easily doable. Maybe an average user can just do it by watching a YouTube video, versus other threats that are requiring more knowledge, more skills, and maybe one can be in scope, one not. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, I think it is a question to your point of like with the firmware, how practically challenging or difficult it would be to do some sort of update. And that would depend maybe on the manufacturer, how they implement firmware updates.
All right. Okay, so next slide.
Okay. Yeah, and this is basically going into more depth of some of the scenarios that we talked about in terms of placement, because one of the things that came up with at the interim meeting was this idea about how many advertisement packets a victim's device would get depending on where the tracking tag is placed. So this is directly from that, which was the concern that, so for example, if it's in someone's car, they might see fewer advertisements than if it was like right on their person. And so we have to kind of think of like what radius of closeness to a person should we be able to detect. So I came up with some ideas for this here. So one is if the tag is placed on someone's person or like their immediate belongings. So like maybe it's not physically on them, but like it's in their backpack. And then another one is like where it's in proximity but not on their person. So for example, in a child's backpack or in a car. But then we also have to consider situations where the tag is nearby, but it's not used for unwanted location tracking. So this is basically false positives, which could occur from a family member or on transit. So for example, I use the AirGuard app and I get notified a lot when I'm on a train or on a plane because someone who's sitting next to me has a tile that they're using to track their backpack. And then I think the other thing is we want to consider a bunch of different scenarios. So for example, where someone suspects that they might be tracked without their consent already. And I think active scanning is a good way to support that use case where someone already knows that they might be being tracked. And then where scenarios where people don't know that they're already being tracked and that they need to be warned that they might be being tracked without their consent. I can pause on this slide too.
Any thoughts? All right. I think people are like, please give me more text so I can review it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, so this is a section where I think we really need insight from manufacturers. There are going to be constraints. So at Gabrielle's presentation, some of the things they came up with for the multi-dealer secret sharing was that they would have to advertise multiple packets because everything doesn't fit in. So if we're working with Bluetooth protocol, we know that that's going to be a constraint for any system that we come up with. And the other thing is power constraints. So this came up a little bit, the idea that whatever protocol we implement, if it had a huge impact on battery life, that would be a problem, right? So I think getting some sense of what's an acceptable reduction in battery life is useful also. And then also device constraints. So the protocol has to be able to be supported by existing hardware, or are manufacturers open to designing new hardware? I assumed that we would want this to be supported with existing hardware and software. So that maybe, or sorry, well, at least hardware. So maybe people have to do a software update on an existing location tag, but they wouldn't have to buy a new location tag, for example, for this to be supported.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we had some people volunteer at the interim that claim they knew these things, so we can directly reach out and try to get some input. All right, I'll move on.
Okay, so this is like the beginning of some really specific proposed requirements, and some of these are drawn from requirements that are in other documents or that will be in other documents, and some of these are just some of my own ideas. So I didn't necessarily want to immediately pull in the requirements that are in the Apple Google Internet draft just because I want to think from like first principles, what do we think the requirements should be, and knowing what they already are in other documents, but also thinking like, if we could design this from scratch, how would we kind of choose some of these requirements? So here's some of the ones that I came up with, and you can already see that these are some design parameters that I think might have a big impact on the kinds of protocols that we can use. So one of the big ones is, if users should be able to actively scan their location for devices that might track them, how long should that take? So for example, right now on Google, you have to wait 10 minutes, which maybe is an acceptable time, maybe not. And so I said, okay, well, one parameter for that should be like, the scan should take less than Y minutes, where maybe Y is 5 to 10 minutes. And also there was a concern at the last IETF about people being able to basically buzz other people's tracking devices. So maybe we could say that the scans should not trigger on devices that are nearby their owners to avoid those kinds of false positives. And then the other one is the detection time for a passive notification. So what's an acceptable amount of time for someone to be tracked by this device and receive a notification? So for example, if I am traveling a long distance, I basically have kind of tracked myself with a location tag for 5 hours and not received a notification. So I would say like 5 hours is maybe not an acceptable level, but what is an acceptable level and how does that relate to false positives? So for example, if you say 15 minutes, then that might have a really high false positive rate. So I think we kind of need to agree on what we think an acceptable false positive and like false negative rate and detection rate are. And those are things that I think I want to talk more broadly about how we get feedback about what those values should be and what's also technically feasible. And then tags that are separated from their owners should notify users. So how and how often? And I have some ideas for that. So I also, this is my personal opinion, but I think that users should be able to customize their settings. And this also gets into something where I wasn't clear on the charter about whether or not we can say what platforms should be required to do. For example, like notification. When I say notification, I mean either a notification on an end device or like a beep. So like what the frequency, type, and sensitivity are, and whether or not we want to allow people to customize these things. Like right now, AirGuard lets you customize them. And then what obligation the platform, like the end user device, has to assist the user in locating trackers. And then also that the user should be able to disable the tracker. And the question mark is whether or not they should be able to do that remotely. Basically, right now, like if you know that the tracker is following you and you physically find the tracker, you can disable it, whether you smash it under your boot or you take the battery out. But there's a kind of an open question about whether or not you should be able to do that remotely or whether or not that would be able to be taken advantage of in some way. So there's a lot of stuff on this slide. I'll pause there.
All right, I'll give it a second if anybody else wants to jump in. But I think it could be challenging to get agreement. I think that you may need to pick a number and then have people tell you whether you're high or low. I often find that the way to get people to comment is to pick a number. Luckily, there are people getting in the queue to tell me maybe I'm wrong and they know the answer. So, Ecker?
Yeah, I don't think we should put numbers here, because we're operating at the bleeding edge of what's actually statistically possible. And so if we pick numbers, we're just gonna be like, well, maybe we can't hit them. So like I'd like to understand like that's just requirements making it a vacuum. Like as soon as possible would be great. So like, as soon as possible, perfect accuracy is what you actually want. And so like I think, once we actually know what we're trying to build, and it's not like, these technologies are already deployed. So it's not like we can be like, well, we're not going to deploy the technology unless it's better than this. So like, so I think like regrettably, like we should see what we actually can do, and then once we actually know what we can do, then we can try to tune the parameters in some way that we like. But I think trying to pick numbers here is going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of this is saying even if we don't pick parameters now, we can choose things that we think we should use to assess. Because one of the things that came up in the interim call was, oh well, this thing might not work well because it'll have a higher false detection rate or whatever. But I think if we have these different protocols and we want to choose the best one, we can at least look at these metrics and say, okay, well, this is how we can evaluate and we can decide which things we think are more or less important to be able to practically do.
This is DKG. So I actually think that the false positive rate and false negative rate are going to depend on the prevalence of the devices that are in society. They're going to depend on how many collaborating tracking network devices are out there. And I don't know that we know how to measure that. It's going to differ from state to state within the US and from nation state to nation state across the world. So I don't even know what this means, false positive rate, in the context of where does someone actually live? Who do they find themselves around? What's their technical environment? So I don't even know how we would measure these numbers. Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me like they're highly dependent on, the number of tracker devices that are in use as intended in the neighborhood, right? So I don't know how to get, like, I see what the number is for minutes, and I think we can pick numbers for those, but the false positive rate and false negative rate, I'd like to hear someone describe exactly what that means. How are we measuring that? And I agree with you, Maggie, that we do want to try to come up with some metrics that we think are plausible before we complete the thing so that we can compare solutions. but I'd like to hear a lot more detail about what it means. Like, what is the false positive rate? What's the numerator and the denominator for the rate?
I think that's a good point. I think Alexander talked about this a bit in the AirGuard paper, so we can look to that.
Brent?
Yeah, thank you. I think if you define the probability detection or the detection rate for a single accessory, then the mathematics is pretty straightforward. You take how long does it take to have what probability detection to detect something that advertises at a particular rate given a scan duty cycle. That math is, I think, really straightforward. I think it gets challenging when you factor in environmental aspects, like what is the signal strength of that signal? What's the packet error rate in that environment? How much interference is in that environment in the Bluetooth band? That gets harder. And then DKG, I think I agree with you. You call it a separate issue, which is even if the math is straightforward for a single accessory, if you look at all the accessories out there and we're trying to find a false positive rate or probability detection rates based on all the accessories out there, that gets really, really hard. But I think we can write down, at least for a single accessory, what we want to do and tie that back to a scan duration or detection time. Can I have a second comment, if that's okay too?
Sure.
Yeah, on the last bullet, I think one of the things on remote disablement that is, if we get to talking about this at some point, that's worth considering is, why might one want to remotely disable it? I think it's an interesting idea. I think it provides peace of mind that if you, let's say someone planted a tracker in your car, you get an alert and you're like, this is definitely my car. I'm confident it's in my car. I can even play sound and hear it. And I think it's on my car, but I can't physically locate it. That there's that peace of mind that if you remotely disable it, that it's now gone and not tracking you. The flip side is if you can't physically find it, in my example, you cannot, then you don't have that attribution necessarily back to or evidence that you could use to follow through in a law enforcement based process to maybe get the outcome you want. So that's one thing you want to consider if we get to that discussion.
Nick?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on your point about criteria for assessment. I do think like that could be a really valuable contribution of this separate from numbers. And I don't have a position exactly on whether we can or should define numbers, but I think the scenarios might be helpful for that like, yes, obviously like detecting things faster, whether it's active or passive, and having higher accuracy, those things are always better, but there are like thresholds about can you do it can you do it in a single session or not, or like is this going to affect routines like commuting or like if you seek out help, like can it promptly be identified? Like I think we can provide like the reasons that we care about certain thresholds, and that a threat model document would be a good place to do that. Even though, yeah, definitely we should be trying to improve these rates, but I just think that's the criteria is what we should be trying to document.
Hi, a few points. So the first is that, part of why, aside from everything else, part of why this problem is so challenging is that it's not actually clear what set of observable facts from like the radio interface actually constitute someone, actually constitute unwanted tracking. Imagine that we didn't care any other privacy metric, and all you had was like a beacon that broadcast every second and said, "I am here's my fixed identifier, and I am, and here's the last time I saw the device I'm paired with." Right? Like even then, you'd have the question of like of like what constitutes unwanted tracking, right? We're both on a train. You have an AirTag, and you put your phone in airplane mode, and then 2 minutes later, I decide you must be tracking me, and I and I freak out, right? That's undesirable, right? And so it's like the problem is like that there's a set of like that there's a set of radio facts that are insufficient to determine when unwanted tracking is happening, and we're trying to infer from there. So that's part of why this problem is so challenging, aside from any other privacy properties. Second, I'm a little leery of the disable tracker remotely version of this. I can certainly imagine a number of ways this can be misused. Certainly it shouldn't be the case that I can disable any tracker that I can talk to over Bluetooth remotely. That seems extraordinarily undesirable. Maybe you're going to say, well, cabinet so that it's in separated mode or something like that. But then, let's talk about, the person's in airplane mode. It just seems like you could do quite a bit of damage if you're able to disable even only separated tags when they're in Bluetooth mode. If you can talk to them via Bluetooth. So my instinct would be you have to lay hands on the thing. But maybe someone could persuade you is okay, but I think we have to think about it pretty carefully because there are other concerns other than this kind of privacy concern. And of course, these do actually sometimes constitute privacy and safety reasons as well for why you want the trackers to work. People's trackers don't work when they want them. Someone hides my keys and other people to find them.
Bob?
Bob Hinded. Yeah, I was thinking about what Ecker was just talking about, particularly about, I get on the plane to fly over here, a very long plane trip I have 2 trackers, and there's probably a whole bunch of other people that have them, and it will look like they're all tracking me. And I have no idea how you can distinguish that from the cases we're really trying to detect. So this is going to be really hard.
Yeah, I think I asked Alexander about this, and I think AirGuard is also trying to look at, at least in their algorithms, trying to look at where people are to try to figure, maybe also even figuring out how fast they're moving to try to reduce some false positives from that. But I agree that I think that's one of the more challenging false positive scenarios to be able to account for. And I think this is why I think that customization can help, because some people would rather get false positives and some people really rather would not. So I think that's why I think there's an argument for customizability.
All right, we drain the queue on this slide. Next slide. Here we go.
So some of this we've already discussed, but I think I was looking for feedback on it. I think what I can do now is I can maybe make a table or something about key parameters that we can use in assessment, whether or not we put a number to them or not. So I was looking for feedback if there's obvious parameters that I have not included. And one of the things that Jesse and I were talking about with customization was this idea that what if you create all these options for customization, but then it makes it really easy for an attacker who has access to a victim's phone to just turn them all off. So thinking about the fact that someone might have close proximity to be able to control someone's phone and how to make sure that the system is robust enough to those cases, if it's possible to do so. Also feedback on constraints at some point, and just generally if there's other things that I missed. And then the other discussion was where things should be situated. I'm happy to just put them all in the document that I already have been working on for now. But if it makes sense to put them somewhere else, I'm happy to do that as well.
All right, I think for now, you should just put the requirements in your document and we can go from there and figure out how to divvy it out. Get a couple revisions in and then figure out how to cut things up or move things around, as they would say. So, all right, that was the last slide, I believe. I want to thank everyone for participating today, having a lively discussion. I want to thank the presenters who stayed up late or got up early, depending upon how you look at it. So thank you very much. We'll see you all again. Get on the repo and mailing list. Thank you for taking a lot of notes. Erica.
As best I can.
So, all right. thank you very much.
Thank you.
When are we meeting next?
The next in-person IETF meeting is in March in Thailand, but we can have another interim if we want. We just need to figure out what the agenda would be and what we want to talk about. So if you guys want to move things forward faster, just let the chairs know and we can figure out how to do that.
Thanks.
Okay. The sun is out. Oof, we should go outside.